CLIL Discussion 8 Reading in CLIL, recorded on the 28th of October 2009.
So we have a message from Stefka that she has a meeting, and if she can, she'll try and slip in a little bit later during the discussion. But so far we have the seven of us: Ben, John, Lauretta, Lida, Lubov and Peach. And it's great that we've got two real scientists to join us, given that we're going to talk about some science material. If you don't mind, let me just say a few words about organisation, because actually the content of our discussion is very clear. I thought it might be useful if we have some kind of guiding thoughts. Whether or not we refer to them along the way is really up to us, but it helps me, I think, organise my own thoughts. And I thought if we have some questions, when teachers are faced with, and students as well, with material like this, which is basically native speaker textbook material, what do they do with it? Do they do anything with it, or do they just use it as it is? I thought that was a useful question.
Yeah.
And then I thought, is there something we could produce that would be useful for teachers and students in that context, when they're, in a sense, CLIL students and teachers using it, science through English as a foreign language? What could that be that we could produce? It might be that we could produce some steps and guidelines for dealing with text like this. It might be that we can give a list of suggestions for tasks, simple list of bullet-pointed task suggestions. And it might be also that we could suggest places to look for further ideas and maybe literature or other resources that we know are out there. So those three things.
Okay.
And that's as far as I got, basically. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
yes,
sure.
Yes, sure.
Now I know,
Certainly.
Lauretta sent me some ideas of hers, and I did the same sort of thing as Lauretta, and that was pretty much sit down with the pages and jot down, brainstorm some ideas, and that might be a good place to start, because I think that will deal with the first question, won't it? What do teachers and students do with stuff like this? And would anybody like to start by just sharing their ideas about those 5 pages that are on the website?
But Keith, you told me that Lyubov worked with these texts. Don't you think it's sensible to give her the floor to tell what her experiences are and where the problems were, and or is that not the right idea?
We could do. It might be the best way to do it, and then the ideas from the rest of us who probably haven't taught this material, we could supplement and deal with Lubov's ideas or questions with our own ideas. What do you think, Lubov? Would you be happy to tell us?
Yes, absolutely, I'm fine.
Go ahead.
Well, the thing is, this native speaker material, which is UK textbook, doesn't always fit into my curriculum as teaching in biology in Bulgaria. So I'm trying to guide my students through this text to extract the information which is relevant for them, for our curriculum. And I give them some kind of table to support their note-taking. We usually read it either as a whole class, and we put things down in the table as a whole group, or they do it in pairs or threes, so that they can help each other, support each other while they fill in their tables. Or some other sort, maybe not table, but some other source of support. Maybe a diagram where they label and write down a note about structure and function of organs. With this digestion lesson, we were mostly interested in what substances are digested in which part of the digestive system and what is the outcome.
Okay.
That's very interesting. Of course, in my context, it is very difficult to deal with texts like these because that's not primary material. But I've also got grade 11 students, and I conducted a kind of an experiment last week. I gave them the text. I didn't set any pre-task or while task. I simply told them to look at the text and then afterwards try and see how they approached it. And the interesting thing was they started from sort of a bottom-up approach, looking at words which they knew, trying to put them into context and try and work out the meaning of the individual sentences and then the paragraphs. And of course the diagrams and the pictures helped a lot. That was quite interesting to see, because I don't teach biology at all, but it was quite interesting to see how they approached a very difficult text for them.
May
Loretta?
Yes. May I jump in? Or
Go ahead.
I read the material from the point of view of the language teacher, not from the point of view of the content teacher. But before, I compared the material you sent with an Italian book dealing with the same topics and for the same level of students, just to see which level of student could use the book in Italy. And as language teacher, I thought that it could be interesting to activate the vocabulary that the students maybe just know about the topics, because there are some vocabulary that maybe students who are confronted with this kind of materials already master, already know. And then I think I would use some induction activities such as brainstorming or mind map or this kind of exercise, just to activate vocabulary. It's kind of pre-introduction phase or preparatory phase to the reading. And I think it could be useful also for a content teacher teaching in a foreign language.
Yeah. Can I ask you a quick question, just to step back? What was your impression when you compared this book with the Italian book?
Well, from the point of view of the content, it's almost the same. The content is very similar. There's no relevant difference. It is a book that is used in the second year of the scuola secondaria. That means that the students are 15 years old, between 15 and 16 years old. And they study biology, of course.
Okay.
So the content is very, very similar.
And Keith,
Yeah, go ahead.
could I ask Leo Boff a question?
Yes, of course, go ahead.
Yes, please.
You know, what I think about this text, that the information density is so terribly high, and that sometimes the order in which phenomena are told are a little bit, wrong, as for me, that, for students it must be terribly difficult. And I'm not talking about a language then, but just only about biology. Did you need any of these problems?
Well, it could be a problem, of course, because that's pretty much text and diagrams that you have. Pages, I think. That's one of the problems with having so much text to deal with, is that students' reading speed is not very high. Even though they have had their preparatory year already, these students, when I have that lesson, they're 9th graders, which means grade 8. They had lots of English.
Yeah.
Even though they will know lots of these words, there will be lots of new vocabulary for them, lots of new concepts. And it's not so much the language as it is the biology, which is very intensive.
Yeah.
What I would do if I would teach this in Dutch and not in English, that it needs a lot of exercises. Keith was, telling to start with. And without these exercises, for me, students get completely lost by the abundance of new words, new concepts, there's so much new in this only 5 pages text.
That's true.
Can I throw in a suggestion, having observed Lubov's double lesson on this material? I think Lubov uses a technique which might be useful for us to highlight generally as a principle, because the pages are very information dense, aren't they? There's so much there. And the other point I think Lida stresses is that the organization of it is not transparent at all, apart from headings. Mm-hmm. And I think the point about Lubov's technique was she drew a table on the board which focuses on the core content, so that when the students were reading the texts, they filled it in as a whole class on the board, in a way which I think the textbook should have done in the first place, but it didn't. What do you think about that, Lubov? Is that true?
Well, yes. I mean, a table is always the neatest way to put information when you have things repeating, for example, like place, structure, location, and so on. But why I want my students to read the rest of the text? Because it develops their skills, reading, more words, vocabulary. So it's kind of expanding their perspective. I will examine that table only, but I also make them read the rest of the text, because it's good quality text. Sometimes we have texts which are translated from Bulgarian to English that are not good English text. Yeah. That's why I use this extra.
And I just to come back to you, Lubov, I think you're undervaluing your own skills there as a teacher who focuses on the core content. Even though you get your students to read the rest because it's very good text, actually what you're doing is highlighting to them what they need to know at the end of that unit of work, possibly even what they need to know for the exam. Sure,
yes. I mean, I can't let them go home without this table.
Have we lost Peach, Keith?
I think he's back. He did drop out, but I called him back.
Okay.
Let me try again. Keep talking anyway. You might want to contribute, because in a way what we've done is Lauretta's suggested that we could do some warm-up activity on activating known terminology, and we're now talking about ways of organizing content in texts if it's not already done in the textbook.
I think Lubov's idea of a table is terribly important. It's very difficult to read. I mean, as Lida is right, I imagine it's very difficult to read this in any language, and certainly to read it in a second language. But I think for working in the first or the second language, you do need a table for students to fill as they read through it.
And also, if I may add, I just want to teach my students to organize their notes. That's very important in a high school.
Yeah.
And the person has to develop that kind of qualities. If you always get the table done, you don't develop the skill of producing it yourself.
Yeah, but I suppose it's a halfway stage, isn't it? You give them the table, and it helps them see the organization of ideas, and it helps them make notes. And after they've done that for a while, they can start seeing that organization of ideas for themselves without you giving them the table. Is that what you mean?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you, John.
The other problem Lida asked in her question was one of not just key information, but how it's organized. And in this respect, if I remember rightly, Lubov, your table was something like structure of organ and enzymes, and then what's produced when the enzymes react with the food stuff. Something like that. Is that right?
Yes, correct. That was the information that was the most, that's the center of this lesson.
Okay. I mean, in this way, then, the table does work, doesn't it? Because those areas are column headings.
Just reading and taking notes for themselves. For example, they'll miss the name of the enzymes, which is very specific for digestion. There can be also other things like the pH at which the enzyme work and things like this, what conditions it starts to work. But that was the most important for 9th graders. That's the key.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, did you, how much of the content did they know already before they read this text, or was it mainly new?
It was mainly new.
Okay.
They have done digestion like 2 years ago when they were 7th graders. They may not remember anything.
Yeah.
Unless they're genuinely interested in life sciences.
And would you normally teach it this way? In other words, you get them to read it first and then you talk about it afterwards, or would you talk it through sometimes and then get them to read about it afterwards, in which case the reading would be easier?
Well, we may discuss all the organs. We may discuss all organs and the key vocabulary. Not so much as mind mapping as Loretta suggested, but more like using a diagram with the organs labeled. But then when they have to see the structure of each of the organs, there's lots of other words too. So I've tried to pre-teach them the key vocabulary, or at least activate it in Bulgarian. And then certainly reading will be much easier.
I mean, for me, the question is, at what point in the lesson is it useful to do the reading? Is it useful to do the reading at the beginning of the lesson, in which case the concepts are new, the language is new, the organization of the text might be difficult, as Lida was saying, so the reading is hard, or do you tend to teach a topic and then ask them to read it, in which case they're reading about partly known contents?
Well, I do it the hard way. If that's the question, I'm doing it the hard way. I'm giving them very small time to get acquainted with this new terminology, and then I give them the text, and then we go back as a group for them to report.
Okay.
I think we are identifying a principle, I think actually subconsciously... Oh, we've lost John now. Where have you gone, John? Subconsciously, I think Lyubov identifies what the core organization is and what the core content is by producing a table on the board at the beginning of the lesson. And she might not describe it like that, but I think that's probably what's happened. And my principle, suggestion of a principle is perhaps there's a job to do for the teacher in identifying what that core content and that core structure is prior to the lesson, and then providing it to the learners so that they can use it to guide their own reading or reading as a whole class. What do you think about that?
I agree. I think it's helpful if the science teacher or so, who knows what purpose the text has, what kind of concepts he wants to teach with the help of that text. The subject teacher is probably more aware of what the ideas are behind the text, and a language teacher will probably look at the text more in terms of text organization, in terms of text structure, etc. So both approach.
I agree entirely, Peach. And I mean, sorry for interrupting you, but I think some good science books, some good native speaker science books, do already highlight you need to know this for your exam, and they stress that with some kind of labeling in the textbook. And they do. Science books tend not to organize core content, but geography books certainly do, in my experience. And I think perhaps it's a job that textbook writers, some do it, some don't.
I think in the Netherlands, all textbooks only offer the exam content because, well, that's enough. And students, well, wouldn't like to have more than what's asked during the exam.
Hi.
Hi, John. You're back again.
Yeah, sorry.
And leaders just said that in the Netherlands, textbook writers only really stress exam content. Did you want to say anything else, Leader? Because we brought John back in and perhaps you were interrupted.
No, just as a fact that there is not a lot of extra. Sometimes, there are little boxes with some extra materials, but that's not very often.
Are any of you familiar with... there's a book by a couple of science colleagues in the UK called Language and Literacy in Science Education. The authors are Jerry Wellington and John Osborne. Have you ever heard of that book?
No, I haven't.
John, you're probably familiar with it, aren't you?
Yeah.
And it has what's called DARTs. They're directed activities related to texts. And it's a teacher's book, basically, which has lots of ideas about dealing with reading texts in science. And one of the things that's highlighted in the book is structure in text, organising texts. Lubov mentioned a table or another diagram. I think it might be useful to talk about what those organisations might be with dealing with text. And tables are one kind of diagram. Do you use other types of diagrams, Lubov?
Oh, yeah, sure.
What kind?
Depending on the content. Well, there may be tree-like diagrams.
Yeah.
Are we okay now?
I think so.
Like tree-like diagrams where things are arranged in a subordinated manner, different groups of things. Or there may be, all sorts of diagrams can be used.
You mentioned tree diagrams for subordinating and for grouping.
Yes.
I suppose classifying would fit in there.
Oh, definitely, yes.
And I think, in a way, what we're doing now, even though we're making it up, we're really getting to the heart of dealing with reading text in science books, because if you're going to ask students to talk about, or read about, rather, classifications or groups or subordinations, and there isn't a tree diagram there, then my feeling is that the textbook writers have not really done their jobs properly by having that kind of content only organised in a linear manner in text. Would you all agree with that? Please do disagree.
It's rare, though, isn't it, Keith? I think. Yeah. I think it's very rare to find tasks that guide you through the organisation of ideas in the text in most subject textbooks in the first language.
Yeah.
It would be very useful to have them, but it's not common.
Yeah. Lida, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, what I would like to stress, and I did it many times before, is that actually the teaching in your native language is the way we should like it. We are talking about it now. And then you have the extra problem of a foreign language, where the language teacher comes in, and the two of them should be integrated.
Yes, they should.
So, making all sorts of classification tables and diagrams, you should do that in your native language just the same.
Yes,
because
you should.
Yeah.
If I read this text, it is not my native language, of course, but I suppose my English is well enough to understand completely what's written there. And for me, it is so terribly difficult. Mind you, I'm not a biologist. I'm a simple chemist. But
yeah, I see.
I agree completely with this, Lida. I'm using the same type of diagrams and tables when I teach in Bulgarian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the difference, though, isn't it? I've heard colleagues say this before, that in a sense, what I feel CLIL is offering is bringing all these ideas together in one place, and I talk about them quite a lot. Sometimes people say too much, and when I talk about them, a reaction from the audience is occasionally, well, that's really just good practice, and you do that, you should be doing that in your mother tongue anyway. I think my point is, if it's not there in the foreign language subject lesson, then catastrophe could happen, and failure could happen much more easily than in the mother tongue.
Yeah.
And I think that's what CLIL is about. It's about putting all these ideas out there explicitly for the teacher and the learner.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's right, but it is important that, I mean, these skills, if you just get students to learn these skills, these study skills, like the study skills of reading, when they approach the subject in the second language, your job is huge, isn't it? Whereas, I mean, I think Lida and Lyubov are right. If the school has somehow taught these skills in the first language, they transfer very easily to working in the second language, and teaching through the medium of the second language is so much easier if the students approach it with these study skills already there in the first language.
I agree with you, John. I personally think that a lot of teachers who teach a foreign language are aware of the support they've got to give their students in order to understand a difficult science text or so. On the other hand, a lot of native speaker teachers take it for granted that the students understand the text in their native language, in their L1.
Yeah.
And therefore hardly ever look at the structure of the text and support the learners by using techniques like diagrams or pictures or whatever.
I think that's right.
Okay, there's a wonderful quotation from John there, which I hope you don't mind my using, and it was, if you're trying to pass on these skills and techniques in the second language and they've not been there in the first language, then your job is huge. And the second part of what John said was, it transfers so much more easily if it is there in the first language when you do it in the second language. It sounds very simple, but I think it's a major principle of what we're trying to promote here, isn't it? That what we really want to promote is a whole school policy on language within the curriculum, whether it's the first language or the second language.
Well, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, there is a drive in Switzerland to make any kind of teacher aware of the fact that teaching is always teaching your mother tongue as well, or the learner's mother tongue.
Is there?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Very good.
Yeah. Now I have to throw something else in there. I've come to the end of a thought, and I'm facing a blank. What about places where you've seen really good resources that deal with reading in, say, science or other content subjects in English as a foreign language? Do you have suggestions that we could note down and I could summarise for our webpage about the discussion?
Well, I remember, if I can say something.
Go ahead.
I remember geography and biology supplementary books for the prep class from a Plovdiv editing house.
They were Lettera, weren't they?
Yes. They were done by Bulgarians with a native speaker editor, and they had really good texts, interesting, and then followed by questions to check understanding, diagrams or tables to refer to specific facts in the text. So there was lots of language type of exercise to go with these subject texts.
Weren't they aimed at the language classes of the preparatory
Yes,
classes?
I think so. I think so. They were not linked to the science curriculum at any particular grade.
But nevertheless, it'd be a good place to look for ideas for dealing with content text, wouldn't it?
I think so.
Another place that comes to mind, John, I'm sure you'll be aware of places to look for this kind of thing, is the kind of language services in the local authorities in the UK, like Hounslow, produce a lot of their own materials, and I've seen some, at least photocopied collections of task ideas put together by Leicester. It was called Leicester Section 11, dealing with kids with special needs. But basically, yes, the materials are there to provide lots of help for guiding reading through information-dense texts.
Yes, that's right. Yes, there's a good strain of experience there. The trouble is, it's very difficult to get hold of them. And, you were saying it, you have to know where they are. They're normally sort of, they're not really sort of fully published things. They might be teacher-produced or produced by language services, and it's a bit bitty. What one would really like a publisher. I mean, you and I have talked about this often, Keith. It'd be nice for a publisher to set out to write a subject series of books using the kinds of techniques that we're talking about, aimed at learners working in a second language. But they just don't do it.
That's right.
And I think they're not really aware of the need for it.
Well, at the last IATEFL conference in Cardiff, I came across a series of books which were published beginning of this year, I think, by Richmond Publishing, and they collaborated with a Spanish publisher. I think they were called Santillana, and they produced wonderful material, not only for reading, but for all four skills, for primary and secondary science. And I ordered the books, and I've got a couple in my office, and I think they're really useful for teaching science through a foreign language, in this case English.
Yeah, they're very good, aren't they, Peach?
They are, yes. Very, very helpful and easy to understand, I think.
And Peach, if I may jump in there, is this books that are meant for teaching science everywhere, or just books for teaching science in Spain? Because you said it was a cooperation of Spanish and English publishers.
I think the books are used in the Basque country or in Catalonia. I'm not quite sure anymore. I'd have to look it up.
So are they relating to Spanish vocabulary-wise when it comes to special terms like the biology texts we've read?
No, by no means. As far as I can remember, the books are produced for an international context, but they sort of originated from or started off with a material written in Spain for Spanish learners, but they're being thrown onto the European market now.
In a way, I think Richmond and Santillana have got slightly ahead of the game. They've produced something which...
They have, yeah.
Exactly what we're saying publishers need to produce, and I say bravo. And actually, I have to say, John and I were involved in kind of advising and offering sample materials right at the beginning of that project. So, personally, I know it's putting our ideas out there on the sleeves, on the pages of the books. So bravo to them,
Well done.
And I think one thing I would say about Lubov's context is she works in an IB school. And I've always felt that the IB institutions and the IGCSE service providers, exams and books, could do a lot more for people who are buying their resources, whether they're books or exams, rather than just producing this native speaker material that they adapt in their own context. That's me provoking again, I think. Lubov, what do you think about that? Do you think we should get IB to do more to produce language-focused?
Well, I don't know if we can make them produce more. Maybe we can produce something and suggest it.
Okay.
They don't need to approve anything, to be able to use it successfully in different IB schools.
Maybe you and I could do that. Then we could produce some sample resources based on your own classrooms and your own lessons. That we say, support language through reading or support language through speaking, and then we'll send it to them, see what they say.
Maybe, yes.
Okay.
It's partly a question of markets, and it's partly a question of just whether publishers really understand the context. I think where you get publishers who do understand the need for it, like in Germany, you do get books, like the Cornell's and the history and geography books, which are well written, I think. But then I think other publishers could possibly want to produce that, but may feel the market isn't big enough. On the other hand, there are big markets in the Middle East. I mean, there was a huge market in Malaysia, it probably still is, but there were never any materials which were produced for, let's say, for science in Malaysia, which were written according to the principles that you need when learners are working in a second language. I think there it was just a question of the publishers simply not understanding the situation at all.
I think you're right. Let me throw another idea at you, because we've got about 15-20 minutes left, and I think we could talk a little bit about task ideas. And I know Lubov's lesson, she decided to have the students read the texts, and then they all fill it in together at the board, but led by the teacher, by Lubov. And she has talked to me about other ideas she uses where she gets them to work in pairs. It might be useful for us to try and list a few other suggestions about ways and means of dealing with reading and interaction within the classroom. What do you think about that? I'm throwing it out there, hoping somebody will bite it. Well, tell us a little bit about your paired reading. What happens when you get them to pair up?
Well, they do the same as when we do whole class activity, but then they can talk to each other. The idea is that here they can use their mother tongue to explain to each other if they don't understand, and then they have to decide on writing something in their notes. And then at the end, I make them report so that they can compare their notes. And they have to read it basically, or they can speak it out.
Do you always give them the table? If you put them in pairs to read, do you give them the table, or do you make them identify the diagram themselves?
Well, levels of skills is in their mother tongue. If I'm sure they can do the table by themselves, I'll just throw the text and take notes. But then if they can't manage their notes, I'll certainly give them the table to guide them.
Okay, because it occurs to me that in a way there are many ways of dealing with material like this, and if we get the students to pair up, it's a shame Adrian's not here, because I know Adrian carries the standard for promoting autonomous learning, and he would have a lot to say, I think, about not leading from the front of the classroom. And one suggestion that occurred to me is, because there's so much of the content on these 5 pages, could it be divided up into groups where they have to read, one reads about, say, the mouth, the other reads, say, about the small intestines.
Absolutely.
And then they feed back for a whole plenary filling in of the table. That's one suggestion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely doable in class. Depends on what your aim is. After all, for example, with 11th graders now, I'm provoking discussion on genetic modification, and I give each group different text, and they have to present to the whole class. I give them time to prepare their presentation, and then they have to listen to each other to be able to fill in this bit of information which is lacking from their articles.
And another...
Go ahead, Lida.
Yeah, another way with this text could be that you look from the point of view of the food involved, because well, maybe in classes before they learned about the 3 main groups of food we eat, but it would be quite nice to let them produce tables or teach them to produce tables from that point of view. So what happens with fat that you eat to go through the whole digestive system? And so I think that helps a lot to learn things from different point of views. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about the language now, because, well, the vocabulary and the language teachers have to, tell what they could do extra.
Yeah.
That sounds like a very, very nice follow-up activity to me, looking at the same thing from a different point of view. What does fat do? What does this do? What does that do? Maybe we can sort of focus on pre-teaching. One idea was just mentioned, what vocabulary would you pre-teach, or what would you do about, activating pre-knowledge with regard to this text? Or how could you combine vocabulary and the specific terms of the biological topic? That sounds like, or seems to be, different ways of helping to understand for the students.
Yeah, sure.
To me, Lida's suggestion sounds like a nice homework idea, writing about the journey of your last lunch, for example, through the digestive system. From the point of view of the lunch, of course.
I have to say that I probably wouldn't be able to do it, although I've not been through these courses. But I remember in Lyubov's lesson you stressed a piece of bread and what the product is after it reacts with the juices in the digestive system. And you actually said to the students, you can try that as a piece of homework. I think the focus was it tastes slightly sweet. And so it's to do with producing some kind of sugar, I suppose.
Normal sugar.
Yeah. Well, that just shows my ignorance, but I think you're absolutely right. It actually puts it all in a real life context, doesn't it, if you focus on what they eat themselves.
Yeah, okay, and that's what I miss a lot in this. This text is so abstract. And what I didn't understand at all, for instance, why it starts at page 1 fish. It's not a fish, but it's like fish. And then page 3 is suddenly a human.
You've gone very faint, Lida. I don't know if anybody else can hear you.
Yeah, you're breaking up a bit, Lida.
Oh, I didn't change anything at all.
Try and talk now. You're clear now. Talk now.
Yeah? Okay. I was a bit complaining about the fish on page 1 and the human on page 3. I never understand these, well, maybe to make it funny or to... Well, you much better could use some everyday life examples to show these things, and not starting with the fish and the digestive system, walking through the fish.
Yeah.
And again, that doesn't matter if you teach in your native language or in English, which makes it extra difficult.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there is a movement in the UK which is about bringing science into everyday lives. I think it's actually called Science and Technology in Society or something like that.
Said this, yeah.
And it's about science, and all the focus is on how it links with young people's everyday experiences, or technology and their everyday experiences. I mean, my feeling is that even though it's got nothing to do with CLIL, it leaves the door open to communication, because if it's about the students' everyday lives, they want to talk about it.
You're absolutely right. And why should you not teach these things? Because out of every class, how many students are going to study biology? 2, 3, 4, and all the rest you have to prepare them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful theme to, if you like, because we've got about 8 minutes or so left to be tying things up, because it's an upbeat emotion, and I appreciate Lida for that very reason. She always carries that drive and enthusiasm with her wherever she goes, and I think what we could do, if you agree, is we've referred to lots of resources and lots of examples. I'll summarise them all and make links to them. I'll also try to put in a list of bullet points, our suggestions for tasks. If you think of anything else, please do send them to me after our discussion and I'll add them, because I actually feel that what we've talked about and what's on the page with our suggestions is a very rich and very worthwhile section of material for colleagues. I'll post it to the lists that I'm in, and what we could do is do a similar discussion for another skill area with another content material.
That would be good. Productive skills, probably.
Something to do with speaking or writing, maybe, John?
Yeah.
I think that would be very helpful, yes.
Okay.
Can I just ask a question to the scientists?
Go ahead.
Because Lida and Lyubov, is Bernd there? Are you there, Bernd?
Yes, I'm here still, yes, but I'm not a scientist, though.
Are you an English teacher?
English and history.
English and history, yeah. Well, it refers to you too. You seem to know quite a lot about the kinds of tasks that students need when they're working in the second language to make reading more easy, or speaking or listening or writing for that matter. But I'm just wondering how many routine teachers of subjects in a second language are familiar with these techniques.
Well, actually, I think that it's not only the subject teachers, but also the language teachers that should be, made aware of the fact that it's important to help students to use top-down processing strategies when they read a text, and not go about individual words, individual, bottom-up strategy, use a bottom-up strategy. Especially if you deal with a foreign language, people tend to use bottom-up strategies and say, I don't understand this word, I don't understand that word. So the idea is, what tasks do I put the students to encourage them to use top-down strategies, basically?
But my question is, you know about this kind of thing, and so do Lida and Lyubov, but how many subject teachers know about the kind of thing you're talking about? How many subject teachers working in a second language know about this?
Yeah. It's a question that it's very difficult to give a concrete answer to, but I think the feeling behind your question is that the truth is not many teachers do create extra resources to guide reading. I don't know, is that the experience of everybody in the group, that actually what we're suggesting is still very much on the drawing board rather than in the classroom?
Can I play the advocate of the devil?
Go ahead.
I think, well, I don't know the percentage, 90% of teachers, even who are teaching in the native language, will only use exercises and extra tables and extra diagrams when they are, as long as they are in the textbook. And I don't think we never manage, in this country anyway, not to prepare teachers so well on their future jobs that they can do it by themselves. The textbooks have to offer it.
You're breaking.
Have we lost somebody?
I think we lost John.
Yes, he did break.
Yes.
I think you're absolutely right, Lida. Nevertheless, our 10% is such a valuable community.
Absolutely right.
We have to, can we make that 11%? Maybe with this discussion and with links to resources and other areas for good practice and so on, and books of ideas for teachers. maybe we will expand that 10% to 11. But I think what you're suggesting is perhaps the textbook writers and publishers, as well as the pre-service training institutions, have a real challenge if the community of people supporting learners through reading texts like these are going to do it better. I think that's your message, isn't it, Lida?
Yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, and I personally think that teachers who've got a high percentage of non-native speakers in their classes, I mean migrants or so, in my context in Switzerland, those teachers are well aware of the fact that they've got to offer additional language support to learners with a foreign language background in order for those kids to understand and cope with academic texts. And I think there's a growing awareness amongst subject teachers in Switzerland that this is not only the case for sort of homogeneous classes, but especially for very heterogeneous classes.
Yeah, I think that's the same in the UK as well, Pete.
Yeah.
And in the Netherlands.
Yes, and in Italy too, it's changing a lot. Many content teachers are using strategies in the native language too.
Same here in Germany with heterogeneous classes everywhere.
So that might push the percentage up to 12.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing I've always felt, Peach, is, and other colleagues in the group, that it makes so much sense for the EAL, the English as an Additional Language community, and I suppose that would be the German as an additional language or the Dutch as an additional language community. They need to be talking to the CLIL community and vice versa. There's so much experience that we could bring together to share and benefit from.
Yeah, definitely.
And Keith, you were in the Netherlands a couple of weeks ago. Did you notice any of this movement, combining the two, because we have a subject called Dutch as a second language, for immigrants and...
I think in a way it's very territorial. I don't mean that's deliberately excluding people like us, but it's the same with EAL in the UK. I'm part of a discussion group. I'll post about our discussion there. But I work with bilingual teachers like Lou Bob. I don't work with those teachers in the UK. I would love to, and I'm trying to get myself an invitation to one of their conferences and meet them and talk to them. It's a very slow process, Leader. There wasn't anybody there talking about Dutch for migrant kids in the Dutch school system, but I'm sure it's very well developed. I'm aware that it is developed in a lot of other countries.
And recognizing that we are actually talking about the same problem.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. Well, that's the message we can carry with our discussion today, that it is the same issue. Maybe the circumstances are slightly different, but the principles about structuring learning and supporting language, I think, are very similar.